The log was never meant to be found. It was recovered 17 years later from the wreck of the Sathari fleet carrier Boundless Contempt, wedged inside a sealed data core that had survived the hull breach, the reactor failure, and the 17 years of cold vacuum that followed. The core was pulled by a Terran salvage crew working the Kessara drift, the belt of debris that had once been the Sathari 3rd Expeditionary Armada. And when they cracked it open in a clean room on Callisto Station, they found 14 hours of continuous recording from the bridge of a ship that had commanded 11,000 warships on the day the galaxy learned what a human convoy escort looked like. The recording begins mid-sentence. Confirm visual on the evacuation column. Sensors are painting 612 vessels in the corridor, moving at sublight toward the Anthera transit point. Composition reads as civilian, civilian, civilian. Freighters, transports, hospital ships, colonist haulers. Some of them are running without shields. Some of them are running without engines being towed. That is the voice of Sathari Fleet Intelligence Officer Kale Vren, speaking into the tactical log aboard the Boundless Contempt, at what the timestamp indicates was 3:47 local stellar time on the day the Terran Combined Fleet designates as the Kessara extraction. The evacuation column he was describing contained 614 vessels. Vren's sensors missed 2, probably because they were running so dark that even passive detection couldn't find them, carrying approximately 420,000 human civilians from the Kessara colonies. Men, women, children, elderly, sick, wounded. The entire population of 11 colony worlds that had been given 72 hours to evacuate before the Sathari 3rd Expeditionary Armada arrived to claim the corridor. The Sathari Ascendancy had issued the ultimatum 9 days earlier: withdraw from the Kessara corridor or be removed. The corridor was disputed territory, had been for 40 years, since a Sathari survey mission and a Terran colonization fleet had arrived in the same system within 6 months of each other, and spent 4 decades arguing about who got there first. The argument had been conducted through diplomatic channels, arbitration tribunals, and the occasional border skirmish, and it had never been resolved because neither side was willing to concede the point, and neither side was willing to start a war over it. The Sathari Ascendancy's new Supreme Commander, a figure the intelligence files identified only as the Tessarch, had decided that 4 decades of argument was enough. The ultimatum was simple: leave the corridor, or the Ascendancy would treat every human vessel in the volume as a combatant and act accordingly. The Terran Combined Fleet had responded with an evacuation order, not a counter-ultimatum, not a show of force, an evacuation order. Get the civilians out. Every ship that could carry passengers, every freighter that could be converted, every tug that could tow a crippled vessel, all of it into the corridor, loading colonists and moving them to the Anthera transit point where they could jump to safe space. The escort was 14 ships. 14. Lieutenant Commander Nea Talley stood on the bridge of the TCS Harrow and watched the evacuation column stretch across her tactical display like a river of light. 600 vessels crawling toward safety at the speed of the slowest freighter in the line, and she thought about the number 14 the way a surgeon thinks about a tourniquet that is too small for the wound. The Harrow was a Terran Sentinel-class destroyer, a mid-tonnage warship built for patrol work and convoy escort, fast enough to keep pace with civilian traffic and armed well enough to discourage pirates, smugglers, and the occasional border probe. It was not built for fleet engagement. It was not built to hold a corridor against 11,000 warships. It was built to be useful, reliable, and expendable, and Nea had served aboard it for 3 years without ever resenting that last quality until now. Around her, the other 13 ships of Escort Group Dagger held their positions along the column's flanks. 4 destroyers like the Harrow, 3 frigates, 2 corvettes, 2 electronic warfare platforms, 2 hospital escort ships whose only armament was a point defense array designed to shoot down debris, not warheads. 1 fleet tender that had been pressed into service because it could carry wounded and had a medical bay. 14 ships, 600 civilians, 11,000 Sathari warships closing from 3 vectors. Nea's weapons officer, Chief Petty Officer Rin Adler, was running diagnostics on the Harrow's missile batteries for the 4th time in 2 hours. Adler was a compact, weathered man in his 50s with hands that moved across his console the way a mechanic's hands move across an engine, feeling for trouble before the instruments confirmed it. He had served on 7 different warships in 28 years, and he had the kind of quiet that comes not from calm, but from having already calculated the odds and decided to work the problem anyway. Battery 1 nominal, Battery 2 nominal, Battery 3, the loading arm on Tube 7 is cycling 3% slow. Within tolerance, but I'd rather it wasn't. Flag it, Nea said. If we need Tube 7, we need it clean. Already flagged, already compensating. Adler's fingers didn't pause. Commander, I've been running the numbers on coverage. With 14 hulls spread across a column this long, we've got gaps, big ones. The column stretches 47,000 kilometers from the lead transport to the last tug in the tail. We can cover maybe 30% of that with overlapping fire. The rest is open. I know. The Sathari know it too. I know that too, Chief. Adler looked up from his console. His eyes were the color of old iron, set in a face that had stopped being surprised by anything a long time ago. What's the play, Commander? Nea pulled up the tactical plot and studied it the way her father had taught her to study a problem, not looking at what was there, but at what wasn't. The column was a line. Lines were defensible if you could control the endpoints and the flanks. She couldn't control the endpoints. The lead was 47,000 kilometers ahead, the tail 47,000 behind. She couldn't control the flanks. The column was moving through open space with no terrain, no obstacles, no choke points. What she could control was the Sathari's decision matrix. 11,000 ships could overwhelm 14 escorts in minutes. But 11,000 ships couldn't attack simultaneously. The column was too long, the approach vectors too spread, the civilian ships too densely packed for the Sathari to simply swarm without risking collateral that would turn the engagement from a military operation into a massacre. And massacres had political costs, even for the Sathari ascendancy. The Tessarch wanted the corridor. He did not want to explain to the galactic community why his armada fired on hospital ships and colonist transports full of children. That meant he would probe, send elements forward to test the escort's response, look for gaps, try to separate civilian ships from their escorts, and pick them off in ways that could be described as military engagements rather than atrocities. Which meant the 14 ships of Escort Group Dagger didn't need to defeat 11,000. They needed to make the cost of each probe higher than the Tessarch was willing to pay, over and over, for however long it took the column to reach the Anthera transit point. 16 hours. At current speed, 16 hours. The play, Nea said, is that we make every engagement expensive. We don't try to hold a line, we rotate. 2 ships forward, 2 ships aft, the rest cycling along the flanks on 30-minute rotations. When they probe, whoever's closest hits them hard and fast, full missile spread, point defense saturation, electronic warfare to blind their targeting, and then falls back before they can concentrate fire. We trade space for time. We make them bleed for every kilometer they push into the column. And when they stop probing and commit, then we make the commitment cost more than they expected. Adler nodded, not because he agreed but because he understood. There was a difference and Nea respected him for knowing it. Tube 7 is clean, he said, and went back to his diagnostics. The Sathari Fleet Intelligence Officer's log continues. 411, the Tessarch has ordered the Vanguard forward. First Fang, Second Fang, and the Corrosion Wing, approximately 2,200 ships, are moving to intercept the evacuation column from the starboard flank. Estimated contact in 47 minutes. The human escorts have not changed formation. They appear to be holding position along the column's flanks in a rotating screen. 14 ships. The tactical office has classified the escort group as negligible. I have noted in the log that negligible is an assessment, not a fact, and that assessments of human military capability have a documented history of revision. Vren was, by all accounts, an unusual intelligence officer. The fragments of his personal file that survived in the data core describe a career spent cataloging human military operations with a meticulousness that bordered on obsession. He had written 37 assessments of human naval engagements over a 12-year career, and every one of them carried the same notation in the summary: capability boundary not established. His superiors had repeatedly marked this notation as overly cautious. His most recent performance review, preserved in the core, noted that Officer Vren's assessments of human military capability, while thorough, reflect an unwillingness to commit to definitive conclusions that undermines their operational utility. Vren had responded in the margins: a definitive conclusion about an adversary whose capability boundary is unknown is not analysis, it is fiction. The first engagement began at 4:58. Nea felt the harrow shudder as the first salvo of Sathari missiles crossed into the column's defensive perimeter. 72 warheads on staggered trajectories, targeted at the civilian freighters in the column's midsection. "Point defense, free engagement," she ordered. "Adler, I want countermissiles on those warheads. Everything that gets past point defense, I want a battery solution ready." "Already on it. Point defense engaging. I count 72 inbound, targeting the Meridian star cluster, those 4 freighters running abreast. Countermissiles launching." The Harrow's point defense arrays opened up rapid-fire kinetic projectors that filled the space between the destroyer and the incoming warheads, with a wall of tungsten slugs moving at a fraction of light speed. 23 warheads died in the first 3 seconds. Countermissiles from the Harrow and the frigate Cairn, running parallel 800 kilometers to port, caught another 31. The remaining 18 split into evasive patterns, spiraling through the debris of their dead siblings toward the freighters. "Batteries 1 and 2 engage," Nea said. The Harrow's main missile batteries fired not at the incoming warheads, but at the Sathari destroyers that had launched them. 16 missiles, 2 per tube, targeted at the lead elements of the first Fang's Vanguard screen. The missiles were Terran Saber IVs, fast, dumb, and loaded with enough kinetic energy to crack a destroyer's hull like an eggshell. The Sathari destroyers scattered. 3 of them took hits. 1 lost its forward sensor array, 1 lost a maneuvering thruster, and 1 simply broke apart, the Saber IV punching through its hull from bow to stern and exiting through the engine compartment in a shower of molten alloy and frozen atmosphere. 1 kill, 2 mission kills, Adler reported. His voice was flat, professional, carrying the same weight whether he was reporting a successful strike or a missed shot. The remaining inbound warheads, point defense on the cairn is engaging. I count 7 still tracking. Helm, bring us to heading 042. Intercept those warheads. The Harrow swung hard, engines flaring, and Nea felt the G-forces press her into her harness as the destroyer cut across the column's interior space, threading between 2 colonist transports whose hulls were close enough that she could see the individual window panels and the faces pressed against them. People watching. Civilians watching a destroyer race past their windows with its weapons hot and its engines screaming. Point defense, manual targeting on remaining warheads. Adler talked me through it. 3 on the left, 4 on the right. Left group is converging on the Meridian star. She's the biggest target, no shields, no point defense of her own. Right group is spreading, trying to bracket the transport behind her. Take the left group first. Meridian star can't take a hit. Engaging. The point defense arrays pivoted and fired short, precise bursts that tracked the spiraling warheads with a machine patience that human eyes couldn't match. 1, 2, 3. The left group died in fragments of superheated metal and unburned propellant. Right group 2 down, 2 still tracking. They're inside countermissile range, Commander. Point defense only. Then point defense it is. The last 2 warheads died 400 meters from the hull of the transport ship Gentle Passage, which was carrying 1,100 colonists from the Kessara IV agricultural settlements. Families, mostly, farmers and soil engineers and teachers and children who had spent their lives growing food in the red dirt of a world they would never see again. The fragments of the warheads pattered against the Gentle Passage's hull like rain on a tin roof. And inside the ship, 1,100 people flinched at a sound they couldn't identify and then went back to the business of being afraid. The first engagement lasted 11 minutes. Escort Group Dagger lost no ships. The Sathari First Fang lost 3 destroyers, had 7 more damaged, and pulled back to reform. It was a victory. It was also meaningless. The Sathari had 2,200 ships in the vanguard alone. They could lose 3 destroyers every 11 minutes for the next 16 hours and still have more ships than they started with. Naya knew this. Adler knew this. Every officer on every one of the 14 escorts knew this. They went back to work anyway. On the bridge of the Gentle Passage, Captain Orendes watched the Harrow slide back into its patrol arc through the transport's one functioning external camera, a commercial-grade lens designed for docking maneuvers, not for watching combat, and he tried to explain to his first officer, a cargo specialist named Priya Marin who had never served on a military vessel and had no frame of reference for what she'd just seen, why the warheads had stopped. "The destroyer shot them down," he said. "The destroyer and the frigate. All of them. All but 18. The other ships caught those." Priya looked at the display, where the Sathari icons were pulling back and the escort icons were redistributing along the column. "There are 11,000 of them." "Yes. And 14 of us. 14 escorts." "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. Then she turned to the passenger manifest on her console, 1,100 names, sorted by deck and compartment, and began checking the casualty list from the concussion damage. 3 broken bones, a dislocated shoulder, and a 7-year-old girl who had been thrown from her bunk when the last warhead fragments hit the hull. No fatalities. "I need to make an announcement to the passengers," she said. "What do I tell them?" Des looked at the camera feed, where the Harrow's engine glow was a small bright point against the black. "Tell them we're moving. Tell them to stay in their compartments. Tell them the escorts are between us and them." "Is that enough?" "It's what we have." On the boundless contempt, Cale Vren was writing. From the log. 5:14, first engagement concluded. First Fang Vanguard screen has pulled back after losing 3 destroyers to human counterstrike. Assessment. The human escorts are more capable than the tactical office projected. Their point defense systems intercepted 93% of inbound warheads. Their counterstrike was immediate, precise, and targeted at the launch platforms rather than the warheads. They were punishing the attackers, not just defending the column. This is a doctrinal difference that the tactical office has not accounted for. The humans are not fighting a defensive action. They are fighting a deterrent action. Every probe costs us ships. The question is whether the Tessarch is willing to pay the accumulating price. I have updated my assessment. The escort group is not negligible. 14 ships, properly handled, are enough to make the cost per probe calculation unfavorable at the margins. The Tessarch will need to commit heavier elements or accept a slower advance. I recommend the heavier elements. I note that I am an intelligence officer, not a tactical advisor, and that my recommendation will be ignored. His recommendation was ignored. The second probe came 37 minutes later. From the port flank, 40 Sathari destroyers in a dispersed approach, designed to overwhelm the Escorts' ability to respond to multiple simultaneous threats. They launched in staggered waves, each wave arriving from a different bearing, so that the Escorts had to choose which vector to intercept and which to let through. The frigate TCS Cairn took the first wave. The destroyer TCS Redfall took the second. The Harrow sprinted 8,000 kilometers in 4 minutes to intercept the third wave, which was targeting a cluster of medical evacuation ships running without shields, because their power plants couldn't sustain both shields and life support for the wounded aboard. Adler tracked the warheads with his eyes half closed, reading the trajectories through the muscle memory of 1,000 simulations and the hard experience of 4 engagements that had not been simulations. 18 inbound medical cluster. 9 I can reach. The other 9, Redfall, can you cover? The Redfall's weapons officer answered, taking 5, Cairn, you have 4. Cairn confirms 4, firing. The 3 ships fired in sequence, a synchronized ballet of countermissiles and point defense bursts that shredded the incoming wave across 12,000 kilometers of space. 1 warhead got through. It struck the medical ship Caduceus III, a converted passenger liner outfitted with surgical suites and intensive care units, and detonated against its aft section. The blast killed the engine room crew, 6 people, and left the ship drifting without propulsion, its medical bays still powered, its patients still alive, its trajectory slowly diverging from the column. Caduceus III is dead in the water, the fleet channel reported. Requesting tow. The fleet tender Resolute Hand, the only ship in the escort group with towing capability, broke from its position in the column's center and moved to the crippled medical ship. It took 14 minutes to rig the tow line, 14 minutes during which both ships were stationary and undefended, and the Sathari did not fire on them. Naya noticed that. She filed it. They didn't shoot the tender, she said to Adler. No. They could have. Both ships were stopped cold, no escorts in range. Adler looked up from his console. Maybe their targeting was busy elsewhere. Their targeting wasn't busy. The probe had withdrawn. Nothing was firing. She pulled up the sensor log and studied the Sathari positions during the 14-minute window. The nearest Sathari warship had been within missile range the entire time. It had not fired. Someone on their side made a decision not to shoot a tow operation on a medical ship. That doesn't mean they'll make the same decision twice. No. But it means there's at least one person over there who's still making decisions instead of just following orders. Over the next 3 hours, the Sathari probed the column 9 more times. Each probe followed the same pattern. A group of 30 to 60 ships would advance toward the column, launch a missile salvo at the civilian vessels, and attempt to separate individual transports from the main body. Each time, the escorts of Group Dagger responded with the same doctrine. Intercept the warheads, counterstrike the launchers, fall back, rotate. Chief Adler kept a running tally on his console, written in grease pencil on a strip of hull tape stuck to the edge of his display, an old habit from his first posting on a frigate that had a tendency to lose its digital displays during combat. By the end of the 4th hour, the tally read: PROBS 12. Warheads intercepted. 890, 1 of 947, 94.1%. Warheads impacted civilian vessels, 56. Civilian ships lost, 7. Civilian casualties, ESD, 2,200. SOTHRI ships destroyed, 19. SOTHRI ships damaged, 41. Escort ships lost, 0. Escort ships damaged, 3. Cairn, TCS Redfall, TCS Whisper, all operational. 7 civilian ships, 2,200 people. Naya read the numbers on Adler's tape and felt each one like a stone settling into the space behind her sternum where guilt lived. 7 ships she hadn't been fast enough to reach. 56 warheads that had gotten through the screen because 14 ships couldn't be everywhere at once. "Commander," Adler's voice, quiet enough that only she could hear. "The math is the math. 94% intercept rate with 14 hulls covering a 47,000-kilometer column is better than any simulation predicted. You're not losing because you're failing. You're losing because we don't have enough ships." "I know the math, Chief." "Then stop carrying the 7. Carry the 585 we're still holding." It was the kindest thing anyone had said to her in 4 hours, and it was also the cruelest, because it was true and she couldn't afford the luxury of arguing with it. "Rotate us to the tail," she said. "The next probe will come from astern. They've been testing the flanks, they'll want to try the endpoints next." She was right. The next probe came 40 minutes later from astern, and it was heavier, 130 ships, led by Sathari heavy cruisers whose missile batteries outranged the Escorts' point defense by a factor of 3. The engagement at the tail lasted 22 minutes. Escort Group Dagger lost its first ship, the corvette TCS Brannick, which took 4 heavy missiles in rapid succession while shielding the tail-end transport, a converted ore hauler called the Last Horizon that was carrying 800 wounded civilians from Kessara VII. The Brannick's hull split along the keel, and its reactor containment held just long enough for the crew to reach the escape pods. 31 of 34 crew survived. 3 did not. Nea watched the Brannick die from 8,000 kilometers away, through the Harrow's forward display, and she felt the stones behind her sternum multiply. 3 more. She didn't know their names yet. She would learn them later when the action reports were filed and the casualty lists were compiled and the letters were written. For now they were a number 3, added to the tally on Adler's grease-pencil tape. "Brannick is gone," Adler said. "Last Horizon is intact. Tail coverage is down to the Redfall and the corvette Kesh. That's not enough. Rotate cairn and whisper to the tail." "I'll take the starboard flank alone." "Commander, that leaves you without support on a 47,000-kilometer line." "I know what it leaves me. Do it." The Harrow took the starboard flank alone, and for the next 90 minutes, Nea Tallies fought the loneliest engagement of her career. The Sathari probed twice, once with a screen of fast attack craft that tried to dash through the gap between the Harrow's patrol arc and the nearest friendly escort 12,000 kilometers to port, and once with a coordinated missile strike from long range that sent 200 warheads screaming toward a cluster of transports that had fallen behind the main column because their engines were failing. Adler's hands moved across his console with the mechanical precision of a man who had stopped thinking about what he was doing and was simply doing it, targeting solutions flowing from his fingers to the batteries to the void. Each missile launched a calculation of angle and range and closing speed that his body had memorized over 28 years of practice. He didn't speak except to call targets. He didn't look up except to confirm kills. The weapons console was his instrument, and he played it the way a musician plays during a concert where the audience is dying, and the music is the only thing holding the roof up. 47 intercepted, 12 more batteries engaging, 6 down, 4 down. 2 still tracking, they're inside minimum countermissile range, switching to point defense. 1 down. Last warhead, it's tracking the gentle passage again, bearing 174, range decreasing, 400 meters, 300. The point defense array caught it at 160 meters. The fragments sprayed across the gentle passage's hull, and inside the transport, 1,100 people flinched again. "Kill confirmed," Adler said. "That's 1,093 intercepts, Commander. Batteries are at 61% ammunition. Point defense tungsten reserves at 44%. 61% ammunition, 44% point defense, 12 hours to go." The math was the math. From the log of Kale Vren. 8:47, 8th hour of engagement. The Tessark has committed the second fang and elements of the corrosion wing to a sustained push along the column's port flank. Total forces engaged, approximately 4,300 ships rotating in and out of contact. Human escort losses to this point: 1 corvette destroyed, 2 destroyers damaged, both still operational. Civilian losses: 11 ships destroyed, estimated 3,800 dead. The human escort commander: I have not been able to identify them by name. Their communications are encrypted on a rolling frequency we cannot break. Is employing a rotation doctrine that I have not seen in any previous engagement with human forces. The 14 escorts cycle through positions along the column in 30 to 40-minute intervals, so that no single ship bears the weight of sustained contact for more than 40 minutes before being relieved. The effect is that the Tessark's tactical staff cannot predict where the strongest resistance will be at any given moment. They plan for one configuration, the humans rotate, and the plan meets a different ship with full batteries and fresh point defense reserves. It is an elegant solution to an impossible problem. 14 ships are covering a 47,000-kilometer column against 4,300 attackers, and they are doing it by being unpredictable, fast, and willing to absorb damage that would cause any Sathari commander to withdraw. The destroyer that took the starboard flank alone for 90 minutes, my sensor officer, has tentatively identified it as a Terran Sentinel class, hull designation unclear, intercepted over 200 warheads without support. Its weapons officer maintained a 96% intercept rate for the duration. When the ship's ammunition dropped below 40%, it repositioned to the column's interior, resupplied from the fleet tender for 11 minutes, and returned to the flank with full batteries. I note for the record, the weapons officer aboard that destroyer is either the most skilled gunnery technician I have ever observed, or the most desperate. In my experience, there is no functional difference. Time ground forward. At the 7th hour, the Harrow resupplied from the fleet tender, 11 minutes alongside, missile canisters transferred by rail gun loading arms that were never designed for underway replenishment, and complained about it with grinding mechanical protests that set Nea's teeth on edge. Adler supervised the reload personally, standing at the magazine hatch with a checklist on a data pad, counting every canister as it came aboard. 48 Sabre IVs, he said, 16 countermissile packs, 400 kilograms of tungsten slugs for point defense. That's everything the tender has left for us. After this load, we're on what we carry. How many more resupply runs can the tender support for the whole group? 2, maybe 3. She's burning through stores faster than the cycle was designed for. This was supposed to be a 3-day escort rotation, Commander. We're burning 3 days of ammunition in 16 hours. Nea did the division in her head. 14 ships, now 13 with the Brannick gone. 3 resupply runs. At current expenditure rates, the escort group would be ammunition dry by the 12th hour, 4 hours before the transit point. Prioritize the destroyers and frigates, she said. The corvettes and the hospital escorts get point defense only, no offensive reloads. If they run dry on point defense, they pull behind the line and shadow the most vulnerable transports. That leaves them as targets, not escorts. It leaves them as shield chief, same as us. Different toolbox. Adler wrote the allocation on his tape and went back to the magazine hatch. Nea watched him work and noticed something she hadn't seen before, a slight tremor in his left hand, barely visible, that disappeared when he gripped the data pad but returned when he released it. Fatigue, probably. 7 hours of continuous weapons operation. She didn't mention it. He wouldn't have thanked her for noticing. At the 6th hour, the frigate TCS Sable was destroyed by a swarm of Sathari fast attack craft that overwhelmed its point defense with sheer volume, 43 small, fast ships firing low-yield warheads in a saturating pattern that no single frigate's defenses could handle. The Sable's crew had gotten to the pods. 18 of 26 survived. They were picked up by the transport nearest the wreck, a colonist hauler whose captain had turned back against the current of the column to pull the pods aboard, losing 40 minutes of progress to save 18 lives. Nea logged the transport captain's name. It was the kind of decision that deserved to be remembered. At the 9th hour, the electronic warfare platform TCS Shade was destroyed. The Shade had been holding station at the column's center, broadcasting jamming frequencies that degraded Sathari targeting accuracy by an estimated 12 to 15%, the invisible edge that had kept the intercept rate above 90% for 9 hours. It was unarmed except for a point defense array designed to protect the platform from debris, not from warships. When a Sathari heavy cruiser group pushed through the portside screen, past the frigates that were cycling to the tail, through a gap that existed for 90 seconds before the rotation filled it, the Shade was the first ship they reached. The Shade's commanding officer, Lieutenant Commander Haas, broadcast on the fleet channel. Dagger actual, Shade is under direct fire, 4 heavy cruisers bearing 192. We are maneuvering, but we have no offensive capability. Request immediate support. Nea was 12,000 kilometers away, engaged on the starboard flank. The nearest escort was the frigate TCS Whisper, 6,000 kilometers from the Shade's position, already turning to respond. The Whisper arrived 90 seconds too late. The 4 cruisers fired a coordinated volley, 16 heavy missiles, and the Shade died in a single brilliant flash that lit the column from stem to stern and was visible on the bridge cameras of every transport in the convoy. Haas and 42 crew, gone between one heartbeat and the next. The Whisper's commander, a young lieutenant named Patel, destroyed one of the 4 cruisers with a full saber IV spread and drove the other 3 back. It was professional, efficient, and it changed nothing. With the Shade gone, the Sathari targeting accuracy improved immediately. The next 3 probes killed 6 civilian transports where the previous 12 had killed 7. At the 10-hour mark, the hospital escort TCS Mercy was hit. The Mercy had been running alongside the largest cluster of refugee transports, 12 ships carrying a combined 19,000 people, providing point defense cover with its minimal array. A salvo of warheads got through the outer screen, and the Mercy's point defense operator, a 23-year-old ensign who had never seen combat before today, intercepted 7 of 10. The 3 that got through hit the Mercy in the midsection, and the ship broke. 41 crew. The Mercy's commanding officer was a career medical service captain who had transferred from a hospital station to a hospital escort because she believed that medical ships needed someone who understood triage. She died in the corridor outside the medical bay, trying to reach the escape pods, when the hull breach took the atmosphere out of the section in less than 2 seconds. At the 11-hour mark, Escort Group Dagger had lost 4 ships, the Brannock, the Sable, the Shade, and the Mercy, 107 crew dead. The column had lost 23 civilian ships, estimated 7,400 dead. Adler's tally tape had been replaced twice. The first strip ran out of room, and the second was smudged with something dark that might have been grease or might have been blood from a cut on his hand that he hadn't bothered to treat. 10 ships remained in Escort Group Dagger, 5 hours to the Anthera transit point. Commander, the voice came over the fleet channel. Captain Devereaux of the TCS Voss, the senior surviving officer and de facto escort group commander since the original group commander, aboard the Shade, had died in the 9th hour. Devereaux was a careful, methodical officer who had been commanding frigates for 15 years and had the voice of a man who had learned to be steady by practice rather than nature. The Sathari are massing. My sensors show a major concentration forming at bearing 270. I count at least 2,000 additional ships joining the forces already in contact. This looks like a general advance. Nea checked her own display. Devereaux was right. The scattered probes of the first 11 hours were consolidating into a single, massive formation. Thousands of ships drawing together into a crescent that curved around the column's port flank like a closing fist. "They're done probing," she said. "This is the push." "Agreed. I estimate contact in 38 minutes. At that concentration, they'll be able to saturate our entire defensive screen simultaneously. We won't be able to rotate." "What are you recommending, Captain?" A pause. The fleet channel hissed with the background static of encrypted communications and the distant whisper of Sathari sensor sweeps. "I'm recommending that the evacuation column increase to maximum speed. Every transport that can push harder, push now. Shorten the timeline. The escorts will hold a consolidated screen at the column's center and absorb whatever comes." "Absorb," Nea said, tasting the word. It was a military euphemism for die in place. Devereaux knew it. She knew it. Every officer on the channel knew it. "Yes," Devereaux said, "absorb." From the log of Kale Vrin. 1104. The Tessark has committed the full strength of the 3rd Expeditionary Armada. All 11,218 operational warships are moving to general advance. The order, which I have transcribed verbatim, reads, "The corridor will be cleared. All human vessels, military and civilian, are designated combatant. Weapons free." I note for the record that designating civilian evacuation transports as combatants is a violation of the Galactic Convention on the Treatment of Non-Combatant Vessels, to which the Sathari Ascendancy is a signatory. I further note that the Tessark does not appear to care. The human escorts have consolidated into a tight screen at the column's center. 10 ships. I count them again. 10 ships against 11,000. The column has increased speed. The faster transports are pulling ahead and the slower ones are falling behind, stretching the formation. The escorts are grouping around the slower ships, the ones that cannot outrun what is coming. I have reviewed my 12 years of intelligence work on human military operations. In every engagement I have studied, the humans deployed the minimum force necessary to achieve their objective. They held back. They measured. They showed less than they possessed. This is different. These 10 ships are not holding back. They have nothing to hold back. They are everything, and everything is not enough, and they are positioning to fight anyway. I do not have an analytical framework for this. The general advance began at 1142. The Sathari came from 3 vectors, port, starboard, and astern, in a wave formation that stretched across 6,000 kilometers of space, and moved with the coordinated precision of 11,000 ships operating under a single tactical network. The first missile salvo numbered in the tens of thousands, a wall of warheads so dense that the Harrow's sensor display stopped rendering individual tracks and simply showed a solid band of red sweeping toward the column. "Batteries free all tubes," Nea said. "Adler empty everything." "Everything, aye." The Harrow fired. All 8 missile tubes, rapid cycle, dumping Sabre IVs into the void as fast as the loading arms could feed them. The frigates and the remaining corvette fired. The fleet tender fired its point defense array, designed for debris, at incoming warheads that were very much not debris. The surviving electronic warfare platform, TCS Gloom, threw every jamming frequency it had at the Sathari targeting network, and managed to divert roughly 12% of the incoming salvo into empty space. The rest came through. The first civilian ship to die in the general advance was the Sunward Promise, a colonist transport from Kessara II carrying 960 people. It took 3 missiles in the engine section and broke apart in a bloom of atmosphere and debris. The second was the Kessara's own, a freighter converted to carry passengers, which took a single missile through the bridge and went dark and drifting. The third, fourth, and fifth died in rapid succession, names that Nea would read in the after-action report and carry for the rest of her life. The Dawn Collector, the Farlight, the Patience. "Commander," Adler said, and his voice had changed. Not louder, not faster, thinner, as if something had been stripped from it. "Ammunition at 22%. Point defense at 19. At current expenditure rate, we go dry in 14 minutes." 14 minutes, and the transit point was still 4 hours away. "Understood," Nea said. "Continue firing." The engagement fractured into a series of desperate local actions, each escort fighting its own battle within the larger catastrophe, each one trying to shield whatever cluster of civilian ships it could reach, while the Sathari wave rolled over the column like a tide over a seawall. The Harrow took a missile hit to the port hull that killed the damage control team in compartment 14 and opened the ship to vacuum along 30 meters of corridor. Adler felt the deck lurch and heard the emergency bulkhead slam shut, and did not look away from his console. Battery 2 is offline. The hit severed the power coupling to tubes 3 and 4. "I can reroute through the secondary bus, but it'll take 4 minutes. "You have 2. "Then it'll take 2. He did it in 109 seconds, and when Battery 2 came back online, it fired a spread that caught a Sathari destroyer mid-turn and cored it through the reactor. The explosion was brief and bright and utterly insufficient. Captain de Vert's frigate, the TCS Voss, was the next escort to die. It took a concentrated volley from 3 Sathari heavy cruisers that punched through its shields and hull in a cascading sequence of detonations that walked from stern to bow like footsteps. De Vert's last transmission was calm, professional, and addressed to no one in particular. "Voss is gone. Dagger actual transfers to Harrow. Good luck." Nea was now the senior surviving officer of Escort Group Dagger. She had 7 ships, dwindling ammunition, and the weight of command for an engagement she had never asked to lead. She took a single breath, let it out, and opened the fleet channel. "All Dagger units, Harrow actual. New formation, tight screen around the main body of the column. Everything we have left goes to protecting the densest concentration of civilian ships. The stragglers on the flanks, we can't reach them. Focus on the ones we can save." No one argued. No one questioned. 7 ships repositioned, and the column contracted around them like a body curling to protect its core. From the log of Kale Vren. 12:09, 27 minutes into the general advance. The human escort group has suffered significant losses. I count 7 escorts still operational, down from 10 at the start of the advance. 3 have been destroyed or disabled in the last 27 minutes. Civilian losses are accelerating. I count 39 civilian vessels destroyed since the general advance began, bringing the total to 62. The remaining escorts are fighting with an intensity that I am unable to adequately describe in analytical terms. The Sentinel-class destroyer that I have been tracking, the one whose weapons officer maintained 96% intercept during the solo flank action, is still operational despite visible hull damage. Its missile batteries are firing on reduced cycle, indicating ammunition depletion, but its point defense systems continue to function at near nominal efficiency. The weapons officer is prioritizing warheads targeted at the largest civilian ships, allowing smaller warheads through when the alternative would be leaving a transport full of passengers undefended. This is not a tactical decision. It is a moral one. The weapons officer is choosing which people to save by choosing which warheads to intercept, and making that choice every 3 to 4 seconds, continuously, under fire, with diminishing resources. I have been an intelligence officer for 12 years. I have cataloged human military operations with what I believed was professional detachment. I am finding it difficult to maintain detachment at this time. Adler's ammunition ran out at 12:31. Not the missiles, those had been empty for 12 minutes. The point defense tungsten. The hoppers cycled dry, the arrays went silent, and for the first time in 12 hours, the Harrow had nothing left to shoot. He sat at his console and stared at the empty magazine indicators and felt something shift inside his chest. Not panic, not despair, but a kind of cold clarity that comes when every option has been exhausted and the only thing left is the decision about what to do with what you are. "Commander," he said, "weapons are dry, all tubes, all point defense, we have nothing." Nea's voice came back steady, steadier than it had any right to be. "Helm, position us between the gentle passage and the nearest Sathari firing arc. If we can't shoot, we can block." "Commander, that puts us in the direct path of—" "I know what it puts us in. Do it." The Harrow moved, a 7,000-ton destroyer sliding into the gap between a transport carrying 1,100 civilians and the incoming fire of a Sathari heavy cruiser group, presenting its hull as a shield. The first warhead hit the Harrow's forward armor and detonated in a flash of light and debris that Adler felt through the deck plating in his teeth. The second hit the dorsal section and opened the ship from frame 40 to frame 67. The third hit the engine compartment, and the reactor alarm screamed. "Reactor containment holding," the engineering officer shouted over the damage control channel. "Holding, but we've lost 50% thermal regulation. We're running hot, 7 minutes to critical." 7 minutes. Adler looked at the tactical display and saw the gentle passage still intact behind the Harrow's broken hull, and he looked at the Sathari heavy cruiser group reforming for another salvo, and he made a calculation that was not about missiles or warheads or intercept rates. "Commander, if I reroute all remaining power, life support, gravity, everything, to the point defense capacitors, I can get 6 seconds of fire. 6 seconds. Enough for one burst." "That kills life support, Chief." "For about 4 minutes. We'll be cold and floating, but we'll be alive." "The question is whether 6 seconds of point defense is worth 4 minutes without air recycling." Nea looked at him across the bridge. The emergency lighting painted everything in red and shadow. Somewhere below decks, a hull breach was screaming atmosphere into the void, and the emergency bulkheads were holding, and the ship was dying in increments that could be measured in minutes. "Do it," she said. Adler rerouted power. The bridge lights went out. Gravity failed. The air recyclers stopped, and the temperature began to drop immediately, the cold of space pressing in through the wounded hull like water through cracks in a dam. In the sudden weightlessness and darkness, Adler's hands found his console by touch, and when the capacitors charged and the point defense arrays hummed back to life, he had 6 seconds. The Sathari salvo came, 18 warheads targeted at the gentle passage. Adler fired. In 6 seconds, the Harrow's point defense arrays, running on borrowed power in a ship that was cold and dark and cracked open along 30% of its hull, intercepted 14 warheads. The remaining 4 sailed past and struck the transport behind the gentle passage, the ore hauler Last Horizon, already wounded from the earlier engagement, and broke it in half. 800 people, the wounded from Kessara VII. The point defense went dark, the Harrow went dark. And in the silence and the cold and the floating debris, Adler sat at his dead console and listened to the sound of his own breathing, and thought about 800 people he hadn't been fast enough to save and 14 warheads he had. From the log of Kale Vren. 1247, the human escort group is functionally destroyed. I count 4 ships still capable of maneuvering, and of those, only 2 appear to have operational weapons. The destroyer I have been tracking has gone dark, no power emissions, no engine output, no weapons fire. It is drifting between 2 civilian transports, its hull visibly breached in multiple locations. It is not dead. I can see emergency lighting flickering in what remains of its bridge section, but it is no longer a combatant. And yet the evacuation column continues to move. The surviving civilian ships, 531 of the original 614, are still crawling toward the Anthera transit point at maximum speed. The column has compressed, The faster ships have slowed to stay with the slower ones. They are not leaving their wounded behind. I have been watching this for 13 hours. I have watched 14 ships fight 11,000. I have watched a weapons officer fire until his ammunition was gone, and then position his ship as a physical shield between incoming warheads and a transport full of civilians. I have watched a destroyer go dark and drifting rather than leave the gap it was filling. The Tessark staff has informed me that the Anthera transit point is 3 hours and 40 minutes from the column's current position. They have also informed me that the human combined fleet has been detected on long-range sensors. A force of approximately 200 warships, inbound from the Anthera direction, estimated arrival in 3 hours and 51 minutes. The math is clear. The evacuation column will reach the transit point 11 minutes before the human fleet arrives. If the Tessark commits to a final push now, he can destroy the remaining civilian ships before either the transit point or the fleet can save them. I have been asked to provide an intelligence assessment of whether the human fleet can affect the outcome. My assessment is this: the outcome has already been decided. It was decided in the first hour, when 14 ships took formation around 600 civilian vessels and began fighting. Not because they could win, they knew the numbers, they knew the odds, they knew what 11,000 against 14 meant. They fought because the 600 ships behind them were full of people, and leaving was not something they were built to do. The Tessark can kill the column. He has the force to do it. But the force that answered the evacuation order, the 14, now the 4, now the ones still drifting with their lights flickering in the dark, has already told the galaxy what kind of species protects its own. The Tessark can add to the cost. He cannot change what it has already purchased. I am ending this log entry. I do not wish to provide further intelligence assessments that will be used to target civilian transports. The final entry in Kale Vren's log is time-stamped 1614. It is 3 words long. They made it. The evacuation column, 509 ships, carrying 371,000 civilians, reached the Anthera transit point at 1602. The Terran combined fleet arrived at 1613, 217 warships dropping out of superluminal travel in a formation that filled the transit point's approach corridor from horizon to horizon. The Sathari 3rd Expeditionary Armada halted its advance 8 minutes before the fleet arrived, not because of the fleet, but because the column had already crossed the transit threshold and the Tessark's objective, the Kessara corridor, was no longer blocked by human presence. The Sathari claimed the corridor. The Terran combined fleet did not contest it. What they contested was the cost. Of the 614 civilian ships in the evacuation column, 105 were destroyed. Approximately 49,000 civilians died: men, women, children, elderly, wounded. Their names were recorded in a registry that the Terran government published in full 3 days later on every diplomatic channel and public broadcast frequency in the settled galaxy. 49,000 names, read aloud, one at a time, over a continuous broadcast that lasted 71 hours. Of the 14 ships in Escort Group Dagger, 10 were destroyed or disabled beyond recovery. 67 crew members died. Their names were added to the registry, at the end in the same font, at the same pace. Chief Petty Officer Rin Adler survived. The Hera was recovered by the combined fleet, dark, cold, cracked open along a third of its hull, drifting on residual momentum between the gentle passage and the wreckage of the last horizon. When the rescue team cut through the bridge hatch, they found Adler still strapped into his weapons console, his hands resting on the dead controls, his eyes open. He had been sitting in the dark for 3 hours and 27 minutes, breathing recycled air from his emergency suit, listening to nothing. When they asked him if he was all right, he said, "Check the gentle passage first." They checked, 1,100 people, all alive. The gentle passage's captain, A civilian merchant named Oren Des later testified before the Terran Senate Committee on the Kessara extraction. When asked to describe the performance of the naval escort, he said, "That destroyer put itself between us and the warheads. It had no ammunition, no power, no engines. It just sat there, like a wall, like a person standing in a doorway with their arms spread and saying, 'You have to go through me.' And they did go through it. They hit it until it broke. And it still didn't move. It stayed in the doorway." Ren Adler did not testify. He submitted a written report, 14 pages, single-spaced, detailing every engagement, every missile count, every intercept rate, every failure. At the end of the report, in a section labeled Recommendations, he wrote one sentence: "Send more ships." The Sathari Ascendancy held the Kessara corridor for 11 months. During that time, the Terran Combined Fleet underwent what the Sathari Intelligence Service later described, in a captured assessment document, as a mobilization of industrial and military capability that exceeded all projections by a factor that we are unable to calculate because the upper boundary of the projection was itself based on data the humans provided. And the data the humans provide is, as Fleet Intelligence Officer Vren repeatedly noted, not indicative of capability maximum. When the Terran fleet returned to the Kessara corridor, it was not 217 ships. It was 6,412. The Sathari 3rd Expeditionary Armada, 11,218 warships, the largest single fleet the Ascendancy had ever assembled, was given an ultimatum: withdraw from the corridor in 72 hours or be removed. The Sathari withdrew in 41. The Kessara corridor was resettled. The 11 colony worlds were rebuilt. The names of the 49,000 dead were inscribed on a monument at the transit point, a structure visible to any ship passing through the Anthera Gate, bearing no message, no motto, no decoration, just the names. And at the base of the monument, in letters small enough that you would have to bring your ship close to read them, a single line from the final report of a weapons officer who had fired until his ship went dark and then sat in the cold and waited. Send more ships. The Terran Combined Fleet sent more ships. The Galaxy noticed. The Sathari Ascendancy noticed. The 37 other spacefaring civilizations that had been watching the Kessara extraction through their own intelligence networks noticed. And they noticed something else. Something that Fleet Intelligence Officer Kale Vren had written in the margins of his final assessment, in a hand that the forensic analysts described as unsteady. The humans did not send 14 ships because 14 was sufficient. They sent 14 because 14 was what they had, and 14 fought as though 14 was enough. This is the variable that our models do not contain and cannot accommodate. The humans do not calculate sufficiency. They calculate necessity. And when the necessity is their people, the calculation has no upper bound. The Boundless Contempt's data core contained one more file, not part of Vren's log, but a personal document, encrypted with a key that the Callisto Station analysts broke in under an hour. It was a letter, addressed to no one, dated the day after the Kessara extraction. I watched 14 ships fight for 16 hours against everything we had. I watched them lose and keep fighting. I watched a weapons officer fire until nothing was left and then use his ship as a shield. I watched transports full of children crawl toward safety while we killed the ones that were too slow. I have served the Ascendancy for 12 years. I have done my duty. I have provided accurate intelligence assessments that were used to target civilian evacuation columns. I will continue to serve because I do not know how to do anything else, but I will not pretend that what happened in the Kessara corridor was a victory. We took the corridor. We killed 49,000 people to take it. And 11 months later, 6,000 ships arrived and took it back, and we withdrew, because the math finally worked against us the way it had worked against those 14 escorts from the first minute. The difference is that those 14 didn't leave when the math said they should. I do not have a word for that in Sathari. I suspect the humans do. I suspect it is a word they do not say aloud because they do not need to. It is the word their ships speak when they refuse to move from the doorway. I do not want to fight them again. Kale Vren served the Sathari ascendancy for 6 more years. His intelligence assessments of human military capability continued to carry the notation capability boundary not established. His superiors continued to mark it as overly cautious. They stopped arguing with him about it. And in the Kessara corridor at the Anthera transit point, the monument stands. 49,000 names, 67 more at the bottom. A line in small letters at the base. Ships pass through, some stop, most don't. The ones that do notice something that the monument's builders intended but never explained. The names are not arranged alphabetically, or by colony, or by ship. They are arranged in the order they died, the first name at the top, the last name at the bottom, a timeline written in the dead. And the very last name on the monument is not a person, it is a ship. TCS Mercy, Hospital Escort, 41 crew, destroyed in the 9th hour while shielding a transport carrying 300 wounded children from Kessara IX. Below it the small letters. Send more ships. They did.